This episode was recorded at ACMI in Melbourne. That is the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, the Museum of Screen Culture in Australia. We were brought down as part of MechaFest, an anime celebration. Basically, it was everything to do with robots and anime in Mecha. This was a live recording which we did in front of a live audience in ACMI's Cinema 2. We go through a history of robots and mecha in anime, from the early parts of the 20th century all the way up to right now. This was our first ever live episode, and we couldn't be more thankful to ACMI for bringing us down and giving us the opportunity. Hope you enjoyed the episode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ACMI. Welcome to MechaFest. Can I please get you all to put your hands together for Sam, Charlie, and Graham? I would like to acknowledge that the recordings podcast this afternoon is going to take place on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. So again, look, we've had such a fun time already at MechaFest this weekend, but there is a lot more to come. So again, if you haven't got tickets for anything else, have a look at the program. But this afternoon, we're going to do a deep dive into Mecha with the amazing podcast Gateway to Anime. So again, please put your hands together.
Well, hello. Welcome to Gateway to Anime. How are you all? What's going on? I am your host, Sam, and we are so excited to be here at MechaFest in Melbourne. This is a really exciting time for us. Such an incredible event. Charlie, you've already been a part of it. How are you enjoying MechaFest?
Yeah, enjoying it a lot. I just did a panel about Neon Genesis Evangelion, and that was a lot of fun counting down the top moments. So I'm excited to get here and, chat to everyone about just mecha in general and deep dive into how much that has had an impact on everything in terms of sci-fi, robots, and just cool things. We love it.
Oh, that we do. Graham, how are you, my man?
This is terrifying. You think I'm looking this direction? You're going to get so much eye contact. So.
I'm looking forward to it. So, anyway, thank you all for joining us. This is really lovely. And so, we are going to talk about the history of mecha and robots in anime, but we'll cue a video which will explain a little bit more about that before we dive in. Humanity has advanced with the power of machines. And our relationship with them is ever changing. Whether it's our own digital shadows or the uncanny rise of AI. Now, more than ever, we're forced to question what it means to be human. But anime has been asking these questions for decades. As machines and technology shaped our world, anime reflected it back through cyberpunk dystopias and giant mecha wars. Anime warned against the dangers of our mechanized future and sought meaning from the devastation in our past, all from a uniquely Japanese perspective. This is a history of mecha and robots in anime. After the devastation of World War II, Japan began to rebuild and new industries emerged. Tin implements created for the war effort were integrated into a booming tin toy industry, with mechanized robots being a particularly popular product. The burgeoning manga industry contributed to this trend as well, with many popular series focused around robots. Japan's fascination with robots began much earlier. But it was during this post-war time period that the manga and anime industries emerged. Storytellers were reckoning with their experiences during the war, especially the rapid development of war machines and the brand new technology of nuclear fission. As a result, the first anime to set the industry in motion also set the groundwork for the mecha genre. So that is, of course, Astro Boy, and you can't really talk about mecha or anime at all without mentioning Osamu Tezuka's seminal
Astro Boy. It is the beginning, literally the progenitor of televised anime as it exists. It literally created the entire system, which still is in operation today. But the story, it's one of those things, right? Like, I have never actually seen an episode of Astro Boy, and I've probably just destroyed my own credibility in front of a live audience, which is great. But it's one of those things that's so important. It's such a vital piece of media in respect to anime entirely. But it's one of those things that, like, very few people I know, apart from Andrew Levins, who we've had on this show, has actually watched it.
Yeah, and I feel like we all know exactly what it's about, though. It has that much of an impact that without even sitting down and watching, X amount of episodes, we can all tell you exactly what Astro Boy is about. I know the theme, I know everything about it, but I'm not like a dedicated watcher of it because it's so iconic and has paved the way for so many things.
Absolutely. So for those of you who don't know, the story follows Astro Boy, an android young boy with human emotions who's created by Umataro Tenma after the recent death of his son, Tobio. Eventually, Astro is sold to a robot circus run by Hameg, but is saved from his servitude by Professor Otonomizu. So Astro Boy becomes a surrogate son to Otonomizu, who creates a robot family for Astro and helps him live a normal life like an average boy while accompanying him on his various adventures. And the show was serialized from 1952 to 1968 and then enjoyed considerable success abroad. It was then remade again in the 80s under the title New Mighty Atom, but then known as Astro Boy in other countries, and again remade in 2003. It's such a classic, and not a mecha per se, but all about the concept of androids, which again, similar but different, but go hand in hand. So let me just jump off a little bit with the term and concept of robots in media in general. So the earliest examples we see is like artificial life, sort of presented in like early myths and biblical stories, like the reanimated bones in the book of Ezekiel. You've also got the Greek god of fire and craftsmanship, Hephaestus, who had like a bevy of bronze maidens who helped him in his forge, and it features in the Iliad as well. So these are the sorts of ideas you see early on before they become mechanized, but they're often portrayed as blasphemous in these stories, which is again a theme we see throughout many to this day about robot technological advancement, with apocalyptic warnings against blind and inexorable technological progress, and of course ethical questions around the rise of sentient machines. Now this is of course incredibly prevalent in the mecha genre today. We also see examples of early life in the Jewish legend of the Golem and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, of course. So these stories are often centered around the arrogance and ignorance of the creators themselves, rather than the actual creations. But then we have, in Lyman Frank-Baum's children's novel, Ozma of Oz, in 1907, we come across the first ever, what might be debated, but humanoid robot-type character called Tick-Tock, who was powered with a trio of clockwork movements for his thinking, movement, and speech, none of which he could wind up himself. And he was described himself as a slave, entirely deferential to his master, Dorothy. And this was made into a film in 1985 called Return to Oz, which the unofficial sequel of The Wizard of Oz. It bombed.
Maybe one of the most terrifying movies ever made that was targeted at children. If anyone's watched that or had the mispleasure of watching that thinking it's going to be a cute little sequel to The Wizard of Oz, I'm sorry. We shared that experience.
Not the case. Not the case. The original books apparently were much dark. A lot of people do. That film is panned.
I mean, The Wizard of Oz is dark in general, I think.
It's
Dorothy
true.
is the bad guy. We've talked about this a lot on this
100%
podcast
she is.
somehow, but yeah.
Yeah,
I think so.
Just comes in, murders someone, steals their shoes, and then runs around being entitled about it.
Absolutely.
It's like, come on, man. But the first use of the word robot is in Carol Capek's play R.U.R., Rossum's Universal Robots, written in 1920, performed in Czechoslovakia, 1921, then New York in 22, with an English edition published in 1923. So Capek's robots are artificially manufactured from organic materials to perform labor for humans. But they realize that they should rise up against their oppressors, as a good proletariat should, and essentially kill a lot of the humans. But then the play ends on a high note in respect that it turns out that they can reproduce, and like it sort of calls into question about humanity. What can we keep going forward? Are we human? Are we robot? Et cetera, et cetera. One of the earliest scenes of this. But what's interesting is that it introduced the word robot into lexicon and nomenclature around the world. But in an article in the Czech Lidové noviny in 1933, he explains that he originally wanted to call the creatures labori, from the Latin word labor. And Capek found the word too bookish, sought advice from his brother, Joseph, who suggested he call them robots, which is always capitalized in the play and derives from robata, which means drudgery in Czech and work in Slovak. So in these early days, and still many times, you see robots as performing actions for humans, slaves. And probably the most famous writer of robot fiction and the creator of the term robotics, wasn't a term until he created it, is Isaac Asimov. And his most famous literary contribution would have to be the 3 laws of robotics, which are as follows. It's funny because he just wrote these in one of his stories, and now they're basically like canon in all robot stories. It's kind of strange, but it is interesting. So, number 1, a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. 2, a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. Again, robots entirely in service to humans. So what's interesting here is, this is going to lead me to the first robot built in Japan. His name is Galutensoku, and that translates to learning from the laws, there he is, learning from the laws of nature. So the robot could actually change its facial expressions and move its head and hands via an air pressure mechanism. A lot of robots in America were steam powered, and then they became electrically powered, diesel powered. But the creator wanted to make it feel like a bloodstream system, so he used pressurized air to make him move. It had a pen-shaped signal arrow in its right hand and a lamp called Rekanto, which translates to inspiration light, in its left hand. Perched atop of Galutensoku was a bird-shaped robot named Kokuyocho, which translates to bird informing the dawn. When Kokuyocho cried, Galutensoku's eyes closed and its expression became pensive. When the lamp shone, Galutensoku started to write words with the pen. I'm obsessed with this thing. I just think it's so cool.
It's wild. When you first told me about it, I thought you were talking about an anime. And then you were like, no, this is real. And I was like, no, it's not. Anyway, it is a real thing. And it gets even weirder.
It does get weirder. Galutensoku was displayed at some exhibitions in Japan as well as Korea and in China. But then he just was lost. Disappeared. No one knows where Galutensoku went, where he ended up. And there's theories that he went missing en route to Germany on a tour, but again, no one can actually confirm this. It's so interesting. So the creator, Makoto Nishimura, who was a biologist and professor at Hokkaido Imperial University, and he was concerned about the idea of robots as depicted in CapX Play, because he didn't like the idea of them being slaves to humans. He wanted to build something that would celebrate nature and humanity. Rather than be a slave, it would be a friend, and even an inspirational model to people. So I think this is particularly interesting when you consider the relationship between characters and mecha and robots in anime compared to in the West. And I think Galutensoku, now there's lots of theories as well that he informed Tezuka's work. There's no actual evidence to suggest, he never says was inspired by this, but a lot of theories that it kind of makes sense. Even like the robots in Castle in the Sky, Miyazaki's, there's a whole, they're still tending to nature and to the garden. And then, of course, it's the humans who come in and mess it all up like normal. Yeah. And it's just so fascinating to see these like depictions in anime and manga and how it goes back to this awesome dude, Galutensoku. I just think it's so cool. And the fact that no one knows how he's built him still to this day, it's crazy.
I think, it's so interesting and unique to a lot of these stories we're talking about is that the actual like robots and mechas themselves are not necessarily the enemy. They're kind of celebrated in a way. Whereas I think a lot of other things are sort of like, we built this machine. Like it's
out of control.
Yeah, it's kind of very different. There's a lot of like reverence to the machines.
Massively.
Yeah.
Massively. Yeah, and also often the machines are the main, like especially in the Super Robot, we'll get to that in a minute, but the machines are often like celebrated massively, not feared. Well, if they're feared, it's it's the humans using them. But it's just very different, I think, comparatively. So this brings us to the first robot we see in anime, and that is in 1940, Electric Octopus. It's in the name. It's an electric octopus, which featured a powered, piloted mechanical octopus. And this was followed by Yokoyama Ryuichi's propaganda manga in 1943, The Science Warrior Appears in New York. Title again tells you exactly what you need to know about that.
Off the tongue, that one.
It doesn't just.
Can't wait to watch Robot Appears in Japan, New York edition.
So but the first series most commonly accepted to be the first in the mecha genre was Mitsuteru Yokoyama's 1956 manga Tetsujin 28, or Gigantor in the West, which was made into an anime in 1963, which is the same year as Astro Boy. And Yokoyama was inspired to become a manga creator by Tezuka, like most people were. He's literally the god of manga. And it began serializing in 1956. And in this series, the robot, which was made as a last-ditch effort to win World War II by the Japanese military, was remote-controlled by the protagonist Shotaro Kanada, a 12-year-old detective whiz kid, which you might notice a trope appearing very early here, which gets repeated so much throughout anime. So the story turned out to be hugely popular. Like, it blew up and inspired generations of imitators. And before I dive over to you, Gray, to talk about the super robot concept, there's a great quote here from anime critic Fred Patton, who says that almost all mecha anime plots, such as the Monster of the Week formats, which Tetsujin 28 was, were actually metaphors for refighting World War II and defending Japan and its culture from Western encroachment. So, from Astro Boy to Tetsujin 28, we have what is now the mecha genre.
Mecha is mostly associated with large humanoid machines with limbs or other biological characteristics. The size of mechs can vary greatly across the genre, but are distinguished from vehicles by their humanoid or biomorphic appearance and size. Generally, they're fucking huge. Mechas differ from robots in that they are piloted from a cockpit, typically located in the chest or head of the mech predominantly. Mecha does not refer to form-fitting powered armor, like Iron Man's suit. Mecha are usually significantly larger. There are two major distinct subgenres. That is the concept of the super robot and the real robot. Super robot generally focuses on ultra-tech mecha that often have elements of mysticism and tend to use a monster of the week format. Mecha are almost superhero-like in this genre and sometimes involve neural link or some kind of connection to the pilots. Then there is the real robot. This is where the mecha are shown as tools rather than semi-mystical creations, and the focus is more on the pilots themselves rather than the machines. As the mecha genre developed, these subgenres would get melded into each other. Neon Genesis Evangelion is an example of both, and the mecha genre is often combined with other genres, like fantasy in the Vision of Escaflowne, political drama in 86 in Code Geass, or existential drama in Evangelion. But the first clear direction for the mecha genre was the super robot. Following the success of Astro Boy and Gigantor in both Japan and the United States, the mecha genre helped to define anime.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
As humanity reached the moon and sci-fi cinema was breaking ground, the mecha genre flourished with optimistic stories of miraculous technology. And with the help of a booming toy industry, the mecha genre became dominated by super robots.
Yeah, we'll go through a little bit of like the super robot and real robot. I think the mecha genre is quite broad.
Insane.
But as humans, we like to put things into nice little buckets and say, well, this is this thing and this is this thing. But the mecha genre, you can have, realistic war dramas, you can have high fantasy, you can have adventure stuff. But we're here to explain what it is, so we will. The super robots tend to be highly stylized robots with often fantastical, even magical powers. Sort of the key characteristics, so you will, is they tend to be like over the top and powerful, but they also tend to be unique. There only tends to be like one of the titular robot. The tone of super robot anime tends to be good versus evil, like including clear cut. Like you'll have the super robot versus the monster of the week type thing. There's a lot of emphasis on the connection between the pilot of the robot. He tends to be someone who's very like forms an emotional connection with the robot, or he's like picked by destiny or a higher power. Let's talk about combat. Because combat is really like, you've got things like super moves and, there's like burning finger and dragon punch and all that type of stuff, but it's a giant robot. So
the rocket punch.
Yeah, it tends to be a lot more over the top. And because it's of the 70s and it was very early in the day, so you look at this and think, well, that's quite a childish show. But it's not. Like it's like any sort of anime where you peel that layer away, you think, oh, this is a kid's show, but it's actually dealing with some really like heavy themes. It's just wrapped in a monster of the week type thing. So one of the sort of the founding animes that we're going to talk about is Mazinger Z. that came around. Here it is on the screen. See, I don't need to be here. Let's just watch Mazinger Z. So this is like one of the real founders of this genre. I'll give you a little brief synopsis while this is playing. Teenager Koji Karabuto pilots the amazing super robot Mazinger Z against the Mycenaean Empire, led by, and this might be one of the greatest like characters of all time, the evil mad scientist Dr. Hell.
It's perfect.
Like, don't bury the lead. Just go straight for it. Dr. Hell. Damn. This show was like hugely important to the anime industry. Japan had just experienced like the kaiju boom, but anime and manga was really sort of suffering. And this sort of like gave it the life, like the kiss of life.
And they're kind of similar, I'd say. Mecha and kaiju kind of cross over a bit.
Big
just
things,
giant
punching things, pretty much. Like Ultraman was super popular in like the late to early 70s. And you can see the influences on like this sort of giant robot fighting monster type thing.
And it was written by the same guy, Go Nagai.
Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned that.
Devilman Crybaby as well.
Devilman, and you can see the influences on the characters. Like, I believe Mazinger Z is demon god, translates. So he's got some demonic sort of. He's definitely into it. Another thing that's also massive was the sort of merchandise of anime. It was sort of the first sort of time that things were mass produced in plastic, like plastic robots that were starting to be exported as well. Mazinger Z, as the show was very popular in Italy, but what they did, because they're Westerners, they sort of repackaged the show and the toys and called it Shonen Warriors. Shogun Warriors, sorry. So a lot of people around the world probably don't know what Mazinger Z is, but like would have known Shogun Warriors. So I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah.
Some other notable sort of super robot stuff that came around was Ghetto Robot. This sort of introduced the combining elements of robots. So individual pilots, like one was called Bear and one's Eagle, and and they combined to create the Super Bear Eagle. That sort of idea. I don't actually know.
And it's about damn time.
It's about damn time. Does that bear have eagle wings? Oh my God.
What's missing is an eagle on that bear.
Yeah. Needs more eagle. So that was kind of one of the first shows that like had multiple pilots, had a team that sort of came together. And then I think the anime that really solidified that concept was Beast King Go Lion, or as it's probably better known in the Western sort of world, is Voltron.
Yes, of course.
Again, the combining of lots of small robots to form one big one, which again, massive for the toy industry.
Totally.
Massive for the toy industry. But that's kind of the gist of the super robot. It's a almost magical giant robot punching something in the face every week and selling a good toy. So, do we move on to real robots? Okay. So, there are like a lot of similarity. Like I was saying before, there's a lot of crossover between the two. We just like to put them into nice little buckets. But the key sort of things about real robots is they tend to be a bit more grounded in science and engineering. Like you can tell that they are robots. The real robot tended to be, you wouldn't see like joints and pistons and cogs and stuff. So real robots tend to be mass produced. They tend to be part of military units that basically things for war, as opposed to a fighting evil robot.
Mystical, they're setting against alien invasion or whatever. Yeah.
The pilots themselves tend to be civilians or they're trained. They're not picked by destiny. They don't have an emotional bond. Although later on in some modern animes they tend to.
Yeah.
But that's more of a technological thing than a spiritual thing. Real robot animes tend to have darker themes, heavier themes.
Yes.
War, politics, like the ethics of their technology, human conflict, that type of thing. So again, a lot darker, morally grey subject matter. The biggest of all the real robot genres that you guys might have heard of is Gundam or Mobile Suit Gundam.
Sorry, what is that called?
Mobile Suit Gundam? Write it down. Is there a clip? Roll it. Don't need to be here.
Good. That was very good.
I could have been sitting there with you guys. So yeah, this is Mobile Suit Gundam. Like you probably recognize, you would have seen it anyway. It's a classic. It's ubiquitous. It's all over pop culture. Do you know what the original name for Mobile Suit Gundam was? No, it was called Freedom Fighter Gunboy. And I think they should have kept that.
I think they should.
I mean, that's a
real
much
missed
better
opportunity there.
Yeah. Hey, have you seen the latest episode of Freedom Fighter Gunboy? Created in 1979 by Yoshiyuki Tomino by Sunrise, which is now Bandai Namco. This anime sort of really cemented the idea of giant robots being tools for war, as opposed to freedom and justice and helping people. I'll give you the little synopsis about Gundam Mobile Suit while it's here on the screen. In a war between the Earth Federation and Zion, a young, inexperienced crew finds themselves on a new spaceship. Their best hope of making it through the conflict is the Gundam, a giant humanoid robot, and its gifted teenage pilot, Amuro Ray. It's a classic. It's an absolute classic. Hard to watch now. We've definitely moved on, but
it's still there. It is so.
It's got the sauce.
It's been reinventing itself continuously for such
never
a long
ends.
time.
Like-
And Gundam is like the biggest mecha show ever, I would say.
there's not
Easily.
even a
Like there's not
question.
even a
Yeah.
It's again, it's got those heavy themes. Like it deals with like the human cost of war, technology, and it's sort of like the double-edged sword of creating something.
Yeah, and it's humans
like-
versus humans as well.
Yeah.
It's using the tools, using them as the robots as tools.
And the cycle of violence.
Yes.
But I think when you think about the time period of which this came out, or even when the creators were probably young, it was probably World War II. So they would have had first-hand experience of seeing like technology and at its worst.
Yes.
And then even at the time when it was airing, that you think about Vietnam is going on then, so which was probably like the first televised war. So people would have greater knowledge of what warfare looked like.
Yeah.
And you can see it sort of starting to permeate like anime. But yeah, look, it's a super influential show. Its cultural impact is, I don't know, it's hard to calculate or even overstate or understate.
Yeah.
We've had 50 TV shows, films, books, you name it. It also introduced the idea of model kits.
That's the big thing, isn't it?
Yeah, which are known as Gunpla. Sure, you're all building Gunplas at home. I am.
He's very good at them too.
I'm very good at them.
I'm not so good at them, I have to say.
Plug for a video we did just recently, but yeah.
Charlie builds a Gundam. It's great.
Goes about as well as it sounds.
I think you did all right. I think you did.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. But it's super important to the Japanese culture. Like Gundam itself is, it's officially recognized as a cultural ambassador of Japan, which for some reason, I think it's hilarious showing up to a cultural event or an ambassador ball and there's a robot there and a bow tie.
Hello, sir.
They've got giant full-size replicas of Gundams throughout Japan that are mechanized, that move, limitedly move, but it's really hard to sort of sum up Gundam in like a 10-minute block of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually had a guest on recently on our podcast. You can check out that episode if you're interested in getting into Gundam. It's called Getting Into Gundam. And we spoke to a podcast who are called Mobile Suit Breakdown, which is a great name for a podcast
It's a great name.
Mobile Suit Gundam. But they basically just take us through how to get into it. And it's just so overwhelming and there's so much history to it. And it's really fascinating.
Yeah. If you want another example of the sort of real robot anime genre, another seminal piece is Macross.
Yes.
Or as it's known in Japan, I think its different name is Super Dimensional Fortress Macross. So another
Again, it's better. That's better.
It's not a tongue twister at all. This sort of takes place in the far-flung future of 1999.
What are they up to?
What are they doing there? Is that Will Smith?
Is that a hoverboard?
The Millennium? So that humanity finds a crashed spaceship and decides that they are going to reclaim it or rebuild it as their own. Just as they finish, they're sort of attacked by a space empire called Zentrade. That's wrong. Don't look it up. So it sort of triggers a sort of earthbound, spacey sort of war. This sort of early introduces the idea of like a transformation robot. So the Macrosses or the robots in them are planes that transform into robots. So you're thinking like early Transformers type stuff. Again, seminal piece of work, similar themes as Gundam, although there's a love triangle in it. It's very saucy. If you love triangles and robots,
They go across everything.
Absolutely.
Phantom of the Opera that's all it's about.
That's what it's
we're
about.
all here for it.
Yeah, will they, won't they, will they? Anyway. And also the if you go and listen to the theme, it's an absolute banger.
It is the
really
best
is.
theme.
It is.
It is so good.
Honestly,
The rest of this is me looping this thing.
Yeah, just these that time. Yeah, so like you go from the super robots in the early 70s, which were kind of aimed at kids to sell plastic toys, to a real maturing like look at humanity and how war affects people and children and stuff like that. So you sort of start to see the genre really sort of mature into the 90s, where things just go nuts. Cue the tape.
During the 70s and 80s, Japan established itself as a leading provider of the emerging electronics, computer, and video game industries. Tokyo rapidly expanded into a dense and sprawling concrete metropolis, with entire suburbs being dedicated to tech and electronics. This all contributed to what's known as the Japanese economic miracle, where Japan's crippled economy after World War II rapidly recovered, making Japan an emerging global power. While this gave the Japanese a sense of national pride, their meteoric rise became a cause of concern for other nations. In the 1980s, the economic threat of Japan to the US was high. High inflation and unemployment in the USA in the 80s were blamed not on American industries, but on the Japanese. These fears of Japan's economic rise and technological prowess are reflected in the media of the time, such as the dominance of Japanese advertisements and the vast dystopian cityscape of Blade Runner. This gave rise to the concept of techno-Orientalism, an expansion of the concept of Orientalism impressioned upon Asia by the West. In the discourse of techno-Orientalism, the West maintains its cultural excellence by depicting a dehumanized picture of a technology-soaked Japanese society. While Western perceptions of Japan were warped by fear, Japanese creators also brought these dystopian sci-fi perspectives into anime. Dystopian cityscapes with violent underbellies became a popular setting, and with the booming economy, more ambitious and experimental anime were now possible. In 1987, two separate anime anthology films called Neo Tokyo and Robot Carnival were commissioned to showcase up-and-coming directors, including the future director of Akira, Katsuhiro Otomo. This dark creative turn for the anime industry during Japan's economic boom is most clearly expressed in the landmark film Akira. The jaw-dropping animation and immersive dystopian future showcase the heights to which anime as an art form had reached, and the tone of works like Akira would set the stage for the next phase of mecha anime.
Well, here we are in the freaky 90s of, like, honestly, the 90s is where it is at for mecha anime, I would say. When I think of, like, you know, famous mecha anime, there's a lot that comes to mind. Obviously Gundam, those big robots, everything. But
Freedom Fighter Robot Boy.
Absolutely, Freedom Fighter Robot Boy. But I would say, like, in the year 1995, we had one that came along that really redefined the whole genre. And 1995 was just a really good year for sci-fi anime in general, and those are the two that I'm going to focus on really quickly and talk about it. So, of course, I'm talking about Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is a show that I think is, you know, maybe one of the most iconic animes ever made, and it has such a huge influence. And I will tell anyone who's not familiar with it, this is just a quick synopsis. The story is set 15 years after a worldwide cataclysm in the futuristic fortified city of Tokyo 3. The protagonist is Shinji Ikari, a teenage boy recruited by his father, Gendo, to the mysterious organization NERV. Shinji must pilot an Evangelion, a giant biomechanical mecha, to fight beings known as angels. Now, this show is so interesting because it wouldn't exist without the mecha that came before it.
Yes,
it's one of the first examples of something that is like almost a like deconstruction of the mecha genre. So for the first half of the show, you really think that you're following a classic mecha story of, you know, a chosen one, a kid who's been selected, you know, saving the world.
An annoying chosen one, but a chosen one.
You know, I'm a Shinji defender.
Look, I think ultimately I definitely agree with you.
No, I mean, I feel like we're all Shinji Ikari at heart. You know, like we're all that 14-year-old kid who's terrified and won't get in the robot. That's my take. But I think that it's interesting because it basically, from episode 16 onwards, and anyone's not familiar with it, like it starts pretty straight down the line, mecha, you know, and then episode 16,
pretty standard.
It just goes absolutely wild. And it takes a direction that I don't think many people could, kind of see coming at the time. But it's a turning point for the narrative. And basically, we end up seeing what we now all remember fondly is just the introspective, psychological, philosophical messaging that comes across in Eva. And famously, the show, basically everyone was furious because the last 2 episodes of the original run did something that no one had really done before. And basically, they, instead of wrapping up the A story, which had all been committed to, they kind of just decided to throw that away, change the animation style entirely, and just focus on going inside Shinji's head, and it becomes this absolutely famously wild ending that most people were furious about. And luckily they did get to redo it a couple of years later in End of Evangelion.
Yes.
So we could talk about basically how this show was created quickly. We've got Hideaki Anno, who is the creator. Just a bit of a lore here. Basically, famously to us, to us three,
Specific podcast,
famously
yes.
got his start because he answered an ad for Studio Ghibli, and they were looking for extra animators for Nausicaa, right?
Yes, correct.
Wow.
And basically him and his group of friends they were not animators, they were amateur animators, and they'd done this opening for a convention that people had seen. They got some traction, so he kind of presented that, and then became a huge part of Nausicaa. They were so impressed with his work. He ended up
He did the God Warrior.
Yeah.
He basically did that by himself. That huge, the big...
Oh, yeah.
That's him.
And
he was given that by Miyazaki himself, and you do that.
Yeah, and there's actually quite a few links of Hideaki Anno and Miyazaki just throughout. Studio Ghibli actually animated episode 11 of Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is something that I didn't know until recently. And Hideaki Anno also voiced a character in The Wind Rises.
Yeah.
So they've got a bit of a connection there, 2 absolute legends. Famously, this show really reflects Anno's relationship with his own mental health.
Yes.
And this show ended up just being really an exploration of depression in a way that is very obvious from episode 16 onwards. It's about confronting yourself. There's so imagery, there's so much happening. It's about as subtle as getting punched in the face. You're kind of watching it going, it feels like a fever dream.
Yeah.
But I think it's a show that, interestingly enough, it's one of those things that, because we're Gateway to Anime, I always talk about things to recommend newcomers to anime.
Yeah.
And oddly, Neon Genesis is something that I go, I don't know if anyone who's not familiar with anime tropes would get on board with it, but I'm so wrong about that because I have a lot of friends who only like Neon Genesis as a show of anime and do not resonate with anything else.
100%.
Even though it is technically it's really dealing with all these tropes that you kind of know through anime.
Yeah.
It still stands out by itself as a truly unique piece of media that I think it's the philosophy really. That's a main kind of...
Well, it's also very cinematic as well.
Totally.
It's if you're into film or anything, just sit down and watch that. Watch how they frame shots or how they take time with the quieter moments.
Yeah.
In the classic we saw earlier on with
the panel before,
in
yes.
the elevator.
My favourite scene in the whole show, by the way.
They're just 2 girls in an elevator that clearly don't like each other, and you're just stuck in this really awkward moment with them for 2 or 3 minutes.
It's incredible. It's such a brave piece of filmmaking in something like a mecha show. Because you've got, 2 people trapped in an elevator who should say something to each other and aren't. And you're just sitting there being like, oh, so God, why don't you talk to each other? But of course, we've all been in those situations where you just can't or don't want to. And that's what I think makes Neon Genesis so special, is because it's dealing with these massive, huge, world-ending concepts. But really, at the end of the day, it's just a meditation on depression and self-acceptance.
Yep.
And at the end, where I love the ending, and so many people hate it, and I love that people hate it, because it's just it's a complete subversion of your expectation.
Yep.
And it just sits there, and he bashes you over the head. It's in many ways, it's a really lazy, sort of lame bit of writing, you could argue. But the way that he stitches it together and lands it, A, for its subversion, but B, for the fact that he's just no. All that other stuff outside of yourself is irrelevant. It's very solipsistic, but it's very much this is the only thing that matters is your relationship to yourself and then how you interact with the world on a personal level. And it is fantastic. I've just quickly got a quote, which I have trotted out before, from, not some lame philosophical thing, don't worry, not yet. But so...
Hold on, guys.
Oh, it's coming. But so this is from Anno himself. They say to live is to change. I started this production with the wish that once the production complete, the world and the heroes would change. That was my true desire. I tried to include everything of myself in Neon Genesis Evangelion. Myself, a broken man who could do nothing for 4 years. A man who ran away for 4 years. One who was simply not dead. Then one thought, you can't run away, came to me. and I restarted this production. It is a production where my only thought was to burn my feelings into film. I know my behavior was thoughtless, troublesome, and arrogant, but I tried. I don't know what the result will be. That is because within me, the story is not yet finished. I don't know what will happen to Shinji, Masato, or Rei. I don't know where life will take them, because I don't know where life is taking the staff of the production. I feel that I'm being irresponsible, but it's only natural that we should synchronize ourselves with the world within the production. I've taken on a risk. It's just an imitation, and now I can only write this explanation. But perhaps our original lies somewhere in there. He's such a fascinating character. Hideaki.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, some of my best work.
Yeah, no, I mean, Ava is just so iconic in so many ways. And I feel like it really takes, because obviously when we talk about Gundam, we know that Gundam is actually about, children in war. It's
horrific.
about, it's a horrific thing.
Children piling doom machines.
Yeah, and I think that Neon Genesis really takes that and makes it incredibly, it's kind of like it's doing it in a way where it's like this is actual psychological kind of, and it is one of my favorites, and I think very popular for a reason.
And I think you can recommend it to newbies.
You can, yeah.
Because even though, obviously coming to it with an experience of mecha means you can sort of analyze the deconstruction, but even without that, it's just a great piece of storytelling.
Yeah. Totally. And also, I mean, Anno's also said it's kind of a critique on otaku culture as well, which is interesting again. So there's so many layers to it. I think the layers actually make it very accessible for people who are not necessarily across anime in general.
Absolutely.
But if you do like anime, you're going to get a lot out of it too. Yeah. So there you go. Also, in the terms of super versus real robot, these are neither. They're really very much like a combination. There's so many, but also super robot versus real robot is one of the biggest debates in anime. If you ever want to go on Reddit and just look at people yelling at each other about so we don't want to get into the reads of that right here because I don't want to, No, let's just scream about that. The second anime that also came out in 1995 that I will mention because it is just so iconic for so many reasons is, of course, Ghost in the Shell.
Wow.
So, big year. 1995, really doing some heavy lifting for all of sci-fi. So we haven't, it's not a mecha show. But it is talking about, a cyborg, which we haven't talked about. A veteran cyborg police officer, Major Motoko, struggles with her own identity, wondering if there's any of her ghost soul, original self, left within her shell. It is implied that she is much older than her young body appears, especially through her jaded persona. The plot follows her investigating some cases where criminals' bodies have been hacked, forcing them to commit crimes. They eventually uncover the Puppet Master, a rogue computer program that has gained sentience. The film ends with the sentient program proposing that Major Motoko merges with them into a new being, a combination of human sentience and machine sentience. So, this film is all about identity.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's so many schools of thought. There's so many academic writings on Ghost in the Shell in particular. There's a great monologue in the middle of the film from the Puppet Master asking about whether we as human beings are just a memory banks and data for the broader organism of humanity. Whether our own DNA is just an information storage device, it's like a computer. And there's similar messages to Evangelion as well.
The instrumentality.
Instrumentality. Yeah. And it's interesting that this is all coming out in the same year. Yeah. But they both have very different endings and very different takes. In fact, they're complete opposites at the end.
Yeah.
So that's exciting. If you're a big fan of both of them, it's really fun to kind of compare how you have one being maybe that's an okay thing. There's also a lot of feminist discourse around Ghost in the Shell. And there's an essay called A Cyborg Manifesto. And it's just kind of talking about physical identity and transhumanist outlook. It's rejecting traditional social boundaries. And there's an approach of cyborg being a post-human form, it's beyond a gender, really. So it's talking about that. It's really fantastic, and I think it's super relevant now, particularly, and it goes in the shell more so than anything. We're talking about AI. We're talking about how we're kind of dealing in an era of what does the enemy really look like? It's not these big giant robots coming in. It's a computer. It's HAL from 2001: Space Odyssey. It's not Godzilla. It's a very interesting kind of new thing, and of course, Hollywood has absolutely taken Ghost in the Shell aesthetically and run with it. The Matrix.
Yeah.
The Wachowski siblings absolutely took that on board and went, this is what we want to make. In fact, they wanted to make Ghost in the Shell, but then couldn't, and so made The Matrix. So many of the iconic, you've got... Anyway, I've actually got a video about this that I'm going to play. So roll the tape.
The tape?
From Saturday morning cartoons to the Academy Awards, anime reached the global stage. With its distinctive art style and mature storytelling, anime offered a fresh and fascinating alternative to the children's animation which most Western audiences were accustomed to. And filmmakers took notice. Landmark anime films and distinct subgenres like mecha offered a deep well to draw from, which would inspire a whole new direction for Hollywood. The pioneering imagery and concepts of robots and mecha anime was reflected back on the silver screen, helping to redefine the sci-fi genre forever. As anime reached the mainstream, new generations of artists began to include anime references as shorthand to communicate broader themes. And as the demand for anime grew, so did the medium itself. Brand new anime genres emerged, and classic genres like mecha continued to reinvent themselves in new and unexpected ways.
There you go.
There you go.
I was trying to think of the word, it was code coming on the screen, but this wasn't really helping. I was like, you know when it's this?
You know
And
when
I
it's
was
like
what
the,
are you talking
the
about?
numbers?
Yeah, that's it.
So we hit the 2000s, and it's interesting because anime has reinvented itself, has reinvented itself so many times throughout this period. Again, like reflected back in socioeconomic factors in Japan at the time. Obviously in the 80s, you've got, even though it's getting much more darker and sort of more realistic, talking about child soldier warfare and whatnot, that's at the background of Japan's booming economy. Of course, we have the economic drop-off in the 90s. Like, as I said, Neon Genesis really is not super or real. It's both at once. And there's just so much of that in the 90s. And then the 2000s, we kind of get to a little bit more of a traditional throwback to kind of real robots. But then that is with, of course, Code Geass. If anyone hasn't seen Code Geass, again, made by Sunrise, the same company who made Gundam. But Gunpla, they made that too.
They did make that.
But so essentially, it's kind of interesting because the series exists in an alternative timeline where the world has been divided into three great superpowers, not dissimilar to Orwell's 1984. And the three powers are the Holy Britannian Empire, the Americas, the Chinese Federation, Asia, and the Europa United Empire, which is Europe and other parts of Asia. So the story takes place after the Britannian Empire has subjugated Japan by using their newest weapon, the Autonomous Armored Knight, or Nightmare Frame, which is a mecha. As a result, Britannia strips Japan and its citizens of all their rights and freedoms and renames the country Country 11, with all of its citizens known as 11s. So the story follows a young prince of the emperor who ends up being exiled after he and his sister witness their mother being brutally murdered sort of in the court, in the throne, not the throne room exactly, but kind of.
It's a throne room.
It is a throne room, actually. That's exactly
so.
what it is.
Yeah.
And his sister ends up being so traumatized by witnessing the murder, she goes blind and also in the process gets shot in the legs, losing her use of her legs. Lelouch then vows vengeance upon his father. He and Nanali, his sister, are sent to Japan kind of as a false peace offering, but then not long after that, Britannia invades and takes it over. So Lelouch then vows to fight back with his best friend Suzaku, who is the most annoying character in that show. But they end up basically like wanting to start a revolution. And this changes because what's interesting about this one, it melds, I mean, Escaflowne sort of did it in the fantasy setting, but this does it where he gains a power called the Geass, the titular Geass, which is not science. Well, they kind of portray it a little bit as science, but it's magic. Basically, it's an eye ability where he has the ability to command anyone to do anything once. So he can just be like, you, jump off that cliff, and then you must. But after, if you survive that or whatever, he tells you to go sit over there. After you've done that, he can't command you to do anything, leading to a rather funny sequence where he tries to get someone to do it twice and looks like an absolute clown. It's really funny.
Yeah.
But it's also made, the character designs are so cool because it's made by Clamp. Mm-hmm. So everyone doesn't know Clamp. They are an all-female group who got very famous for making Card Captor Sakura. And so it's interesting because you've got this aesthetic, this classic shoujo aesthetic, and shoujo, of course, being anime and manga targeted at young women. And so the very skinny, large-eyed, sort of like spiky hair.
Just a classic anime, but like, yeah, it's Bishonen style.
Bishonen style, yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, and it's awesome to see it, because I think it's the only time they've ever done something that's not their own work.
The only time, yes.
Yeah, and so it's kind of fun to see that mesh of like anime and that kind of throwback to that sort of more 90s style.
Very much.
But then in like in a 2000s like anime, which is... Yeah, Code Geass I think is underrated. It's also a show that if you were to ask me to list some famous mechas, I always forget that it is a mecha.
It's a real robot. Yeah, it's not like crazy power. Like the power is obviously the Geass.
Yeah.
But
eye stuff.
Yeah, but the nightmare. I mean, the Britannian Empire utilize a new technology which
Yes.
enables them to conquer the world, but they're not magic. You know, they get there first in the technological race. You know, but what is also interesting about the Geass too. So, Gray, we've got some Celtic influence here. Graham's Scottish, for anyone who doesn't know. That's not a random thing to say. But
Pretty random to them.
pretty random for everyone, no context. Should have
okay.
contextualized.
Just a big Celt fan over here.
Loves Celtic stuff. So a Geass, Geis, is a compulsion laid on someone to do or not do something in Irish and Welsh legends. And while the Geass itself does not lie on any spectrum, the benefits or actions of it may be decidedly benevolent or malevolent. And then Code Geass uses a lot of sort of Celtic and European concepts behind it, which makes it a very interesting piece. It's also, it's not a hard argument to mount that it's a very nationalistic piece, of course. And then the other major hitter of the 2000s is, of course, Gurren Lagann, which is the most super robot of super robot. It was made by Gainax, which was like one of the big companies, and that company then became Studio Trigger, who, if any anime fans out there know Studio Trigger's work, Gurren Lagann was this piece. Literally the guys who made it went, hey, that was pretty cool. Why don't we go make a studio that makes pretty much everything like that? And that became Studio Trigger. And it's the super robot concept again, don't want to say like deconstruction, but it is more of a homage to the super, because it's like the robots literally become galaxy size. Like it's comical, it's silly, but it's also like, it's fun, but tragic. That was one of like, in the 2000s, I think, Code Geass and Gurren Lagann were huge for Western anime fans. Like it really broke in and brought people to a new level of anime fandom, I think, because it wasn't your Naruto and,
No.
I mean, Ghost in the Shell, they're sort of different, but like it was one of those things which just really, I think, elevated Western anime fandom and brought a new group of people to Mecha entirely.
It was also just fun. Like it was over the top and fun.
So fun. Like the
we were
Lush-
all down in the mud and despair and depression, and then this is just, hey, here's a giant robot that becomes the size of a galaxy.
Yes.
Here's a cool like woman firing a sniper rifle.
Yeah.
And it was just cool and fun.
It was super cool and fun. But what is interesting, that was in 2006, and then 2008, the final for Geass, and then 2007 was Gurren Lagann. So now we get to the 2010s to now, which is actually often referred to as the dark ages of mecha, which is really interesting because we haven't had a big mecha hit pretty much since these two IPs.
Yeah.
Now, before any Gundam people come for me, let me say that Gundam exists in its own universe with its own fandom who
Yeah.
never go away.
It's going to be there forever. That's always going strong.
Yeah.
You know, is it
Gundam
as
does-
popular as it was in the 80s? Probably not, but
No.
it's still freaking massive. So,
G-Quax is airing right now as we speak in the current anime season. Like, Gundam's always doing its thing and going strong. But since then, we haven't really had a huge mainstream hit. I mean, 86 may be the closest, which is quite similar to Code Geass.
really similar to Code Geass, yeah.
Sort of nationalist
yeah.
vibe, and like, you know, children fighting a war again. You know,
Totally
it's
same
not
things.
reinventing anything. So I wonder, what do you guys think? Like, why are we in a dark age? Why hasn't it reinvented itself again after doing so for so long?
Everyone thought that Darling in the Franxx was going to be, which is another Studio Trigger, correct?
Not good, yes.
Yeah, everyone thought that was going to be the big one, and everyone got really excited. And then it's one of those things that I'm not even saying a hot take when I say that show just turned into absolute garbage. Everyone agrees with us. It's
Unbelievable
it's not
turn.
good. So not even worth watching. But I think people were really excited about that.
Yeah, people got excited about it.
No, we haven't had anything. And I wonder, it's like, has it just been done so much? It's like, what else can you do? I personally believe there will be something. I feel like, are we going to talk about if Attack on Titan is a mecha anime or not?
It's a fair argument to mount.
I think it is. Because I think it's giving that, like, you know, bio, like, you know, similar to like Evangelion, where you're kind of inside, giving that kind of, you know, for people who don't know what Attack on Titan is.
Where have you been? Where have you been?
Probably
Cue the film.
probably I'd say the most popular anime for the last 20 years. Huge.
Yeah, right up there. The last 10, 15 years, it has been the big export to the West for sure.
Yep.
But the difference is, obviously, the people pilot meat suits. So they're not mechanized at all. They're Titans, so
But
humanoid.
they're piloting it. So therefore,
They are
I think
piloting
it
it.
is like, you know, I think it's a mecha.
I think it's just heavily influenced by mecha. But like, to call it a mecha show, I think we're going to get yelled at online, and people do yell at each other online for making those claims.
I'm going to make the claim. I'm going to get yelled at.
Let's do it. You heard it here first,
Making the
everybody.
decision right
Here we
now
go.
is a mecha
Right.
anime.
Here we go. Cue the YouTube comments. But,
No.
but no, it really interests me because I'm just like, why?
What's your theory?
As you say, everything's cyclical. everything will come back around. There will be something new-ish, new enough. Like, at the end of the day, it's just, have cool robot, Like, that's ultimately what Mecha kind of is. And just getting deep into, like, well, if you think about the Kierkegaardian aspects of Neon Genesis, it's like, yeah, but it's also just like, how cool is that robot, Like,
is it because Gundam is what it is? People are like, well, they're doing the cool big robots exploring war, like, and we can only deconstruct so many times. Is there just, like, nothing left? Is there no juice?
There's never nothing left, though, is
it's
there?
Safe to say that cyborgs and androids are still going strong everywhere.
AI is the big thing now.
That's the thing. That's
it's not big robots are not in vogue anymore.
Yeah.
Like outside of Gundam. Make that very clear. Yeah, I don't know. It just really interests me. It really interests me. What was the last mecha show that you're more of a Gundam fan, but what's the last mecha show? It was definitely 86 for me. Since then, I've just been like,
I didn't even like 86 because again, I was like, I've explored these themes. Darling in the Franxx, but that was trash.
The promise they gave us, and then to
it
destroy
probably
it.
might be Gurren Lagann, to be honest. It might be that long ago that we've had something that was like, oh, this is fresh and different. I'll just keep watching Gundam. Who cares? It's cool.
It'll always be there.
It's always going to be there.
Yeah, what about you?
Like
86?
the last one that I saw, 86 for sure. But I mean, I always angry because I love Code Geass. I think it's a really underrated show. I think it's got the best ending in anime history. Heard that here first, not first. Everyone thinks that, but it's like it's really incredible ending to an anime and very fun. But it's been kind of riffed on a lot.
Game of Thrones tried to kind of do a version of it.
Yep, a lot of things.
Of a mecha. Wait, what? Did I miss his?
Not of the mecha, of the end.
I would love a Game of
Zero
Thrones
ending.
mecha.
Now that's fresh.
A dragon's mechs. It's I don't know. It's interesting because it will come back around. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's dead, but Gigok, who's a huge anime streamer, he made a video about 5 years ago, basically entitled, I think it was The Death of Mecha or The Fall of Mecha or something like that. And makes this argument. And the 2010s was grim. 2020s has been even grimmer. There's been nothing. Nothing really. So I don't know. Something will happen. But unless you count Attack on Titan, which you can, I suppose, then that's the biggest show of the last 20 years.
What a cheery note to leave MechaFest at.
Yeah, you're like...
The genre's dead. Enjoy the weekend, guys.
It's been lovely to come down here. Thanks for having us. No, but Mecha is... But it's always going to be there. And historically, it's like Gundam will never, ever die.
It just influenced so many things that we think
It's
of
everything.
as well.
It's everywhere. It is. And like I said, Attack on Titan doesn't exist without Mecha. Unless you say it is Mecha. So yeah, you go. It's still everywhere. It just might not be exactly what we've seen it as. So it might not be, if they're going to be live flesh robots as opposed to robots, that's what we're going to see moving forward, because those themes and ideas will always be moved on, because in many ways, there was a period where mecha wasn't just like synonymous with anime; it was anime.
Yeah.
Like in the late '80s, it was like that was what it was. That and like Akira, and that's how massive the genre is, and something which we are sure will come back around shortly. But anyway, this has been so cool. This has been so cool. Thank you all so much for coming down. We really appreciate it. This is always fun to talk about anything anime, but to talk about mecha at MechaFest at ACMI is honestly a huge honor. Thank you so much for having us down. We couldn't be happier. And thank you all for coming out to talk. And if you've got any questions or thoughts of your own, please throw them our way, because is Mecha dead or is it still going?
Is MechaFest dead?
That is not.
Did Sam kill MechaFest?
But is anyone still watching anything at the moment? Any Mecha? Any shows you're all about?
With like Super Sentai, Power Ranger stuff,
Yep.
did that influence the start of like anime, like all the mechs and stuff, or was it the other way around? Which happened first?
I think. Do you guys know what Kamen Rider is?
Yep.
So that was one of the big influences that sort of kicked the sort of anime real super robot genre, because you did have Super Sentai doing stuff, you did have Kamen Rider, Villain of the Week transforming into something that is kind of robotic. I definitely think that's very influential, especially when you get into the Super Sentai. But I think Super Sentai stuff sort of came later with the robot stuff. So Kamen Rider was sort of the big influence, and Ultraman, the power suit growing to fight robots. I think the coming together or giant mechs came slightly after Super Robots. So they're all happening in that sort of drug-fueled 70s anyway. So
Yeah, we didn't even talk about Transformers, which one of the biggest exports from Japan into the West, and
Diacon.
Yeah, Diacon. Yeah,
Diacon was the original thing, and that became Transformers came around because kids got kind of sick of playing with robots that transformed into like spaceships. they sort of decided like, oh, well, they're not playing with that, but they love cars. So like, why don't we retool these transforming robots into cars? So Diacon. And then that became so popular that it was sort of brought over to America, which was retooled to Transformers by Marvel Comics, funnily enough.
Right, it was Marvel, of course
Marvel,
it was, yeah.
So there's a team at Marvel that came out with all the original sort of names of like Starscream and all this. Like,
Right.
I think one of the robots was going to be called High Beam at the time, but someone told the writer, was like, oh no, that's a slang for wrecked nipples, and he's like, oh shit, gotta change that one. Optimus Prime. Yeah, so yeah, we missed Transformers, but that's a huge part of
It's a big one.
that's like, oh.
Just rewind
Cue the
that.
tape.
Yeah, no, it's and Power Rangers, of course, as you said, Super Sentai, like huge. A mixture of tokusatsu and mecha. So yeah, there's just so much. Again, we can sit here for 3 weeks talking about every single thing to do with mecha and robots and androids and anime, because it's so massive, which is why we're at MechaFest.
And you still don't talk about Samurai Pizza Cats. It seems a bit strange.
You know what? It's another miss.
Yes.
Another miss. God damn it.
Samurai Pizza Cats.
Banger.
That's a great show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question for all three of you. So, if you could pilot any mecha in the history of the genre, what would you each choose?
Oh man. Okay.
I'm not
We should have
impressed
prepared
enough
this,
to do
yeah.
an Evo.
No,
Yeah.
not sad enough for an
Sad
Eva.
enough for an Evo to power it.
Fair
It's
enough.
powered by tears, right?
Pretty. Yeah.
Mine would probably be like a Wing Zero
Okay, a Gundam.
Gundam in its endless waltz form. Like, it's probably going right over your head. I love this stylistic, like, mid-90s Gundam vibe with, like, real wings with feathers that came off of it, even though they were made of metal. And it was just so over the top. And you could say things like, oh, Wing Zero's not speaking to me. And everyone's like, shit, all right. So, yeah, Wing Zero, very 90s coded.
Yep.
Angel's wings, like, I love it.
I think the huge, massive, monstrous one from Gurren Lagann, just for the lols, because it's literally galaxy size, and it's like, yeah, I want to pilot that once, just to say I have. Be pretty cool. What about you?
I think I'm going to go with a Titan.
I knew you were going to say it.
I know. I know I have to like bite my hand to go, but I think I'm going to go with Aaron's Titan in particular.
The Attack Titan.
Attack Titan.
The naked
Would be-
Titan.
Yeah, it would be pretty good. Or, I don't know, the Colossal. No, the Colossal is actually useless. I'll just like
Well, it's
beat
not
up the
useless,
damage.
but yes.
Cart Titan.
Oh, the Cart Titan.
Absolutely. I
Cart
picked
Titan.
that. I can just move people
The one who
around.
carries the bag.
Yeah, she's like, oh, fun. Honestly, in terms of everyday life, that would be the most useful.
Yeah.
Like, I'm saying.
In fairness, that is a useful thing to have, as opposed to just being able to attack everybody. Like, it's-
What about the one who just bites things? What was he called?
the Jaw Titan.
The Jaw Titan.
Yeah.
They can all bite people.
that's true. Bites them better.
Oh, yeah, okay.
This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you all so much. Thank you to MechaFest for having us. Thank you, Ari. It's been absolutely awesome. And thank you all so much. And hey, thank you, Melbourne. It's been great.
Thanks, Ellen.